if you meet millionaires and billionaires, you'd think, blimey, if I was that, I'd be perfectly happy. Yeah, I'd be on the beach every day. No, once they get to that state of wealth, they just want more wealth. It becomes an obsession, and it's the same with these football clubs at that level.
Thanks for listening to the latest Beyond the Backfall podcast, available on YouTube and all podcast platforms. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single episode.
Welcome to Beyond the Back Four. So as the second round of Champions League fixtures begin this week, we're looking back to 2021 and the launch and then fall of the European Super League. And the question we're asking is it rising again? Has it ever really gone away? Barcelona and Real Madrid specifically have never wanted to let this go. So we've got two perfect people to explore the future of European football with Graeme Bailey, our transfer guru, and football financial expert, Kieran Maguire. So let's go all the way back. Graeme, talk us through the whirlwind 48 hours that was the launch and fall of the European Super League.
It happened so quickly, didn't it? We were getting press releases from all over the shop, and all these teams who had suddenly announced that they were part of the breakaway. I was getting friends all over the industry, TalkSport and etc., saying, "Wow, we've got this statement." They're literally, these clubs announcing it, but it was the sudden. It was all the English clubs. We know the top six that had confirmed their participation. There was quotes from Josh Kroenke, wasn't there, and the like. But then the rate in which they pulled out was just staggering, wasn't it? It was the who can pull out quickest. My memory goes, was it Tottenham to pull out last or Liverpool anyway? But it was just a staggering period in English football history, that from announcing it with the Real Madrids and the Juventuses and the Barcelonas, and it was just the wow. I think from a journalist point of view at the time, I was quite impressed by how they kept it quiet. All these big meetings between the clubs, I thought it was really impressive. Obviously, there was nothing impressive about the proposals, in my opinion, in my fans' opinion, but the way it went. Within 48 hours, and obviously we're still talking about it now because we know that Real Madrid and Barcelona and a few of the big clubs are still going for it. But that period, as you say, Sam, was just a moment in English football history that we'll never forget.
Especially, I mean, Kieran, from your perspective as a Brighton fan, but seeing groups of fans unite is not something we see especially often. And joint protests being held by clubs with massive historical rivalries was quite a spectacle.
I don't think I've ever been prouder to be a football fan than those few hours. The story did break, and the fans of those clubs who would have benefited most, because it was good for Chelsea, it was good for Spurs, it was good for the two Manchester clubs, because 6 into 4 doesn't go when it comes to Champions League places. So why not therefore create an environment where you don't have to even have to finish in the top 6 anymore, because it was going to be by invitation only for the founder members. But it was the fans who rallied round. And I also think that Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher deserve a huge amount of credit, because it was sort of breaking during a sort of a Sky Sports afternoon, and they made their feelings very clear. And I think that rallied the fans round. The formal announcement didn't actually happen until 11:30 at night, and then all sort of chaos broke loose because the website was up, and that website carried on for about 3 or 4 years despite the collapse of the Super League itself. But yes, it was an amazing and it was an amazing spectacle in terms of pure theatre, and the collective lack of backbone of the club owners when the protest started to come through was spectacular to observe as well.
Just for anybody who would be unaware who's listening, Kieran, from your perspective, was the point of this entirely financial, or was there any kind of Puritan football motive to any of these clubs?
No, it was a fantastic financial prospect. The clubs such as Liverpool and Manchester United and Chelsea, they do not want to be playing Bournemouth, Brighton, Palace and so on. So as part of the Super League, it would have resulted in a smaller Premier League. It would have been a far expanded European format. And if you can guarantee every season that you are playing Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Juventus, and so on, then as far as the finances were concerned, everything worked because you couldn't transfer players from one Super League club to another as part of the rules. That meant that was going to have a negative impact on player wages, more money for the owners. The clubs were going to be able to sell their own TV rights, so therefore you're not having to share them with other clubs. So that was more money coming in through the door. The fact that you didn't have to win matches domestically meant that you could go and put out a weakened squad domestically if you wanted, and not have to worry. One of the great things about the Premier League is that it is so genuinely competitive, as evidenced by the fact that we've got Sunderland and Crystal Palace at the top end of the Premier League at present, which is good for football if you're a romantic. All of that became a complete irrelevance. It was being funded by private equity. It was all about redistributing more money, not to players, because the wage cap was going to be 55% of revenue. If you think that UEFA have it at 70% at present, so it would have been lower wages for players, more money for owners, and more certainty. And investors don't like uncertainty. So it was a pure investment decision. And as you've been hinting at, it's not gone away.
It hasn't gone away. And Graeme, are you surprised it hasn't gone away from the reputational damage that was caused first time round? Clubs issued statements of apology to fans. Owners issued statements of apology saying they didn't understand that. Certainly a lot of the American owners were apologising for saying things like, we didn't know how important the historical context of things like relegation are, as opposed to just saying, oh, we got this one. We were after a bit of dosh, but maybe we shouldn't have been.
No, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I think that, Florentino Perez, Jean Laporta, Real Madrid and Barcelona, they had bloody noses after the first round of talks and what happened. It's not going to work. Florentino Perez is leading this charge. He wants it to happen. And he's not a man who normally doesn't get what he wants in football terms. Barcelona and Real Madrid, they look towards these Premier League clubs, got what they've got, and he loves the way that the Premier League caters towards their top six. I'm told that he likes that. And that's what the Super League, it's to cater to the big boys. And that's what Perez wants. And we think that Real Madrid have probably got enough of the pie. How much more do they need? But that's the question, isn't it? And only he can answer that. But do they have enough? In their opinion, they don't. So that's why it isn't going away. So I'm not surprised.
So a significant thing happened in 2023, which was the European Court of Justice ruled that FIFA and UEFA had acted unlawfully by blocking the European Super League. What are the impacts of that decision?
Well, the case was brought by an organisation called A22, and A22 is effectively the mouthpiece of Barcelona and Real Madrid. Juventus used to be involved. Juventus were the last of the non-English teams to pull out, and that was effectively probably about 18 months after Super League itself collapsed. A22 says we are entitled to run a alternative competition to that of UEFA, and the case against UEFA is that UEFA cannot be both the competition organizer and the organisation in charge of distribution of monies as well. It's effectively the accusation that it's marking its own homework, and therefore there's nothing wrong with setting up an alternative product. So it would appear that the European ruling says that if A22 wants to run an alternative competition, it can do so. Having said that, where does this leave UEFA? Well, we have seen the significant changes in terms of the expansion of the Champions League, the increased efforts that UEFA have made to find commercial partners. So qualifying for the Champions League has never been more lucrative than it is at present. And effectively, you've got Champions League versus Super League as rival potential offerings for European clubs. But who are those European clubs going to be? The culture of German football, with its 50+1 rule and its very militant fan base, means that Bayern Munich and Bayer Leverkusen and Dortmund, they're not going to go for it. They will be the last. It was very noticeable in Super League version 1 that there were no German clubs involved. PSG weren't involved because they had the Qatari links, and of course Qatar were hosting the FIFA World Cup at the time, so they didn't want to go and sort of cause problems for themselves with their relationships with FIFA. So that only left England, Spain, and Italy. Those clubs, they still want it. I can assure you that if they thought that they could come up with a palatable version of Super League, and that's what we have seen with the creation of A22. It has the Gold League and the Platinum League and the Blue League and so on. But it's absolutely awful. It would mean that should we get let's say that my worst nightmare comes true and Crystal Palace win the Premier League this season. And yeah, this is how far I've researched this to make it as unpleasant as I can. If Crystal Palace win the Premier, or even just finish in the top 4, they qualify for the Champions League next season. If they had done the same under the A22 proposals, they would play in a knockout, a qualifying competition, to get into the 3rd division of the new creation. But of course, that new creation, it is the equivalent, if that's probably worse than the Europa Conference. And there's no money in it. All of the money is going into the Star League, or whatever they chose to call it. So the rules have changed. A22 and Perez are saying this is a better competition because there is promotion and relegation. But when you actually start to look at the small print, it would take the equivalent. If Leicester had won it, it would have taken them 3 seasons to get into the top division. And by, of course, then all the players have gone because they would have been picked off by the bigger clubs.
And that's what we're now hearing about as the Unify League, right?
Yes.
And Graeme, what is your view? What are you hearing about how everybody stands on that?
I think what Kieran says is massively important about Bayern Munich not being involved in this, and they are really maybe they're the dam that's blocking the whole thing. They're blocking the route. If the European clubs like Real could get Bayern Munich on board, it would be a very different landscape. But there's no signs of that happening. And I think they've been very clever, UEFA and FIFA, getting Al Khalifi, the PSG president, involved in everything on committees and executive members and lavishing positions on him. Not that he isn't important, but PSG and Bayern Munich, if they're not involved, it's really a non-starter. So I think they've been very sensible there. I think the English clubs are paying lip service to what the fans want to hear. All these Florentino Perez is talking to clubs behind the scenes. We know that. And he's talking to Premier League clubs. But you can't stop owners talking. It is what it is. It's like these big transfer deals. It's not like a Football Manager where you suddenly make a bid. Talks go on. We know talks are always going to be ongoing. And I said, these billionaires and these big clubs, is it ever enough? It never ever will be. And even though I think the Champions League has done a really good job actually with this league, I think they did a really bad PR job in explaining it. But then once we've seen it in practice, it's actually pretty good. And it means that all the games, there's no dead rubbers, is there really? They're all competitive. I like the fact that teams can go out of Europe as well. There's no these teams dropping down to European Conference and winning that. I think it's actually worked really, really well. And I think that's the biggest fly in the ointment for the Unify League is the Champions League new version now is actually really good. It's given teams more games. The TV companies have got around 60 more games to show in theory. So they're making more money from around Europe. So I think that the UEFA have reacted really, really well to this. And I think it's going to be hard now for the Unify League to suggest something different because what they were proposing was something different. And I think the UEFA have taken that on board and thought, actually, we can see what you mean here. And they've taken it on board and given the clubs what they want. And I don't think there's much on the horizon for this. But I say it's not going to go away. Florentino Perez wants his way, and he's going to keep trying for something.
And it's not just a whim, is it? Barcelona, we know since 2020, have lost $1.2 billion as an institution. So if the Champions League doesn't plug that hole, they're trying to plug it themselves. And this is their best bet, I guess, Kieran.
Yes, but Barcelona are a complete basket case financially. That they've taken out the equivalent of half a dozen payday loans, and the problem with a payday loan is it's short-term gain, long-term pain. So now every time that somebody goes to the Barcelona Museum, Barcelona get €51 out of every 100 because the other 49 they've effectively sold already to somebody else. And that means that they are going to be falling behind other clubs in Europe. And we must remember that Barcelona and Real Madrid, they do not see their opposition as being Real Betis or Sevilla or Valencia. They see that they are competing with Manchester United, Chelsea, Liverpool, Bayern Munich, PSG, perhaps Juve, and one or two, and AC Milan and Inter. That's who they benchmark themselves against. And there is a fear, and I do understand this, there is a fear that the Premier League has become the cuckoo in the European football nest, and it's forcing everybody out. If you go to the international markets, everybody, if they are a broadcaster, wants the Premier League rights. If they get La Liga rights, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, we can watch La Liga here in the UK. How many people watch it? Yeah, the viewing figures are tiny. But if you go to Malaysia, if you go to Nigeria, if you go to Australia, if you go to America, the biggest football in town is going to be the Premier League. La Liga has lost out to that. So how do these big clubs compete? Because the value of the La Liga rights are around about half of those of the Premier League. You get more money from your non-La Liga football exercises, which would, of course, have been the Super League. So that's why those clubs are still piping on about. And also, as you rightly said, if you meet millionaires and billionaires, you'd think, blimey, if I was that, I'd be perfectly happy. Yeah, I'd be on the beach every day. No, once they get to that state of wealth, they just want more wealth. It becomes an obsession, and it's the same with these football clubs at that level.
That sort of answers my next question, which is, it's easy to understand why the likes of Real Madrid or Barcelona would want a piece of this, because you're right. You ask football fans outside of Spain, most will go, oh, I might try and watch a Real Madrid game, but they're not tuning in for Levante. But the English proportion of the European Super League was exactly 50%, 6 clubs coming. Well, aren't they already in the European Super League, in the Premier League?
They are, but the Premier League has reached a plateau in terms of, we've seen in season 24-25, viewing figures were down 7% domestically. It looks like those viewing figures are not doing quite as well this season as well. So there is an issue with the Premier League. And also from the perspective, if you are the Glazers, if you are Stan Kroenke, if you are FSG at Liverpool and so on, they are conscious that they are owning these international brands, these international franchises, and in their minds, they're not football clubs, they are brands, they are franchises, but they're not making money from them. So how can we make money from them? We can go into a competition which we're guaranteed to participate, where we can force down wages and we can become even richer.
I mean, I am not a financial expert in any way, shape or form, but is there an element of this? This sort of comes up, I think, now and again when it comes to things like the European Super League. And Florentino Perez has said at one point in the early stages of the launch, 14-year-olds aren't sitting and watching football. So how do we get those 14-year-olds? Well, we have to create something for them to come and watch. And I don't know if, Graeme, your viewpoint is the same as mine as someone who doesn't have the financial experts of Kieran. But is there a possibility that football fans have just been priced out of football? Because I'm not super old, but when I was younger, Champions League was free to watch. And football was much more easy to access and cost nowhere near what it costs now to watch. So if 14-year-olds aren't watching football, is it just because they don't have access to it, because the price is just too high?
I agree with you, Sam. The finances, I follow a championship club, and it's very expensive. It really is. It's very expensive to me to take my 12-year-old son. But my 12-year-old son loves football. I hate to say this, his love of football came from playing FIFA. Again, it was free. He could sit for hours and hours playing online, playing games. And obviously it's harder for playing the streets now, but the joy of football is still there. It's still in the fan base. But increasingly from playing FIFA, that means they want to watch the Champions League players. They want to watch this. So yeah, although the Super League is dead, and in my opinion, but actually no, I'll counter myself there. It's not dead. It's only hibernated until someone finds a better product. It's the product. It's a Champions League that is winning. But if Perez and the like can come up with a product that's better and is more appealing to the youngsters, and I think that's what you're saying, Sam. He is thinking what can be better. How can we improve this? And he's wrapping it up as if he wants youngsters. He wants 14-year-olds around the world to watch football. No, that's not what he's in it for. He just wants more eyes on Real Madrid, which equals more money. That's what he wants. But he's not. He's going to leave no stone unturned here. And yeah, I'm not worried. I'm not worried massively by this, Sam. I think, but I would. Let's keep an eye on the other clubs who are against it. Let's see what the Premier League owners are saying. I think it's an interesting one, and the one club who worry me, as Kieran's alluded to in this, is the Bayern Munich. If their board come out at any point and say, "Oh, we're committed, and we quite like this," if we hear Bayern Munich softening on this, and we're not saying one club might be responsible, but it might be that simple. If Bayern Munich get on board with Real Madrid, this whole landscape is good. I really mean it. I think this whole landscape could change. I think that the one club holding this whole thing back is Bayern Munich. I really do.
Well, the current European champions aren't in the conversation. So if PSG were on board, if Bayern Munich were on board, and maybe to a lesser extent Ajax were on board, because also that spreads, I think, the clubs across the continent. So it suddenly becomes more European than just England, Italy and Spain. Do you think that would be the turning point?
Well, I think it's fascinating, actually, because obviously since this point, PSG have suddenly become one of the big players. They've won the Champions League. When this first came up, PSG, yeah, there were a decent-sized fish in this big pond. There's suddenly a bigger fish in there now, PSG. So I do think that's a fascinating point, that suddenly they have more of a say in this now. Yeah, I don't know. It's and a lot of people have been wondering why we are talking about Super League. This hasn't gone away, and it won't go away. And it's fascinating. It's as fascinating as it is worrying. It really is.
Kieran, Graeme said he doesn't think this ever goes away. So do you think something occurs and it happens? Barcelona say, Bayern Munich say, yeah, we'll take a piece of this. We like the idea of it. We want to play against these guys all the time. We're here for the entertainment value. Maybe they find a nice way to package it. Or is there something that ultimately kills the concept stone dead? Whether that's UEFA changing the Champions League again to satisfy everybody's appetites, or whether broadcasters say they're not interested. What do you think is the most likely outcome here?
I think it will be a very difficult one to get over the line. And there's a further issue. From the 1st of November, we've got the independent football regulator. Now, one of the issues relating to the regulator is that it gives a license for football clubs to play domestically each season. And look at the legislation. If a football club decides it wants to join a competition which is not based on merit, and that's what it says in the rules, and I think Perez's latest incarnation claims it is based on merit, but it's not really, then it has to have fan approval. So I think it's winning hearts and minds of fans is going to be very difficult, here in the UK, because I think to change the mindset of the fan base is going to be quite a challenge. But I absolutely agree with what Graeme's saying, that Bayern Munich are a big issue here. German football culture is completely different to that of the UK. We do see clubs who loathe each other. We do see fans coming together and acting in concert. And the concept of football belonging to the people is far greater in Germany than it is in the UK, as has been seen by the demonstrations and the actions when I think they tried to bring in, it was either Friday night football or Monday night football into the Bundesliga TV deal. And the fans simply turned around and said, this is not acceptable. And the fans put pressure on the clubs to turn down the deal, even though it was financially beneficial for the clubs to do so. So it's going to have to be a very persuasive case, but we are living in a world where opinions do change, and people can be fooled by magic beans, as we see in other aspects of life and in other aspects of football as well, with some of the things that some of the products and services that clubs have tried to persuade fans to buy. So we wait. But my view, if UEFA deliver, then why take the risk of moving to a different model? I think the next step is that some of the bigger clubs were saying, look, yeah, the Swiss model really works. Let's move from 8 matches a season to 10 matches in the group stages, or 12 matches. And then you've got that further problem of, we've got an expanded Club World Cup. We've got an expanded World Cup, which is potentially going to, 64 teams in in 2030. We've got the Nations League. Something's going to have to give. And I know that Richard Masters is saying we've got no intention of reducing the size of the Premier League from 20 to 16. And the 16 is what the owners ideally want, because that would also allow them to have more pre- and post-season tours. But even to 18, turkeys aren't going to vote for Christmas. You got to have 14 votes. If I'm Aston Villa, if I'm Newcastle, if I'm Leeds United, why would you vote for that? So I think it's a difficult one to sell, but difficult's not the same as impossible.
So I think it's pretty clear both of you think this is still a possibility and it still lurks over the global football stage. Graeme, what should football fans be looking out for within their football clubs to think, why are you doing that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that Kieran talks about a regulator. I think the fans need to be aware of the regulator. I think they need to be aware of what it is, what's coming in. It's not the saviour. And I think the regulator could have the opposite effect. If a regulator comes in and does a really bad job, that could swing the fans in the other direction. And politicians shouldn't be getting involved in football anyway, in my opinion. And I think we need to be wary of this regulator. I think that could have a negative impact on the whole of English football and could sway fans in the opposite direction. Go, Joe, what? Things can't get any worse in England now. Let's look at the Super League. I hope that doesn't come to pass. I really don't. I hope we stick as we are. I hope, as Kieran said, I hope UEFA carry on tweaking the Champions League. I think it's in a pretty good place right now. But who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? If we look to overregulate, the whole thing could snap and have the opposite effect. It really could.
Yes, the regulator has got to get it right. I've got to be completely transparent here. I pop up to Whitehall quite often. I talk to people connected to the regulator. I've trained people who are potentially going to be working at the regulator. But the government wants a light touch regulation. And if it is light touch and it is simply a case of protecting the integrity of the game from rogue owners, if it's trying to persuade the EFL and the Premier League to get into a room together and sort out a money deal, then that's fine. If it starts to go further, and I have seen some politicians trying to hook agendas onto the remit of the regulator, it could go wrong. But to be fair, the legislation actually says that the regulator has a very narrow remit as to what it can get involved in. That it shouldn't be getting involved in day-to-day issues. It should not be making any comments at all about Hooper's refereeing display at Chelsea versus Brighton at the weekend or anything like that. VAR, just stay in your lane. I think we'll be okay.
Okay, so last question. Graeme, will we see within, let's say, the next decade, a European Super League or some version of it? What do you think?
No, but yes, within 25.
Oh, okay, nice. Kieran?
I'm going to go for no, because I think UEFA will have made so many concessions that we will have all of the benefits of the European Super League as far as the big clubs is concerned without it formally being called the Super League.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your expertise, your insights, your thoughts and your wisdom. Everybody who, if you've been listening, thank you very much for sticking with us. Do you want to hear a European Super League theme tune belting out as the players stand on the pitch anytime soon? Let us know in the comments below. Beyond the Back Four is back next Monday. We'll see you then.